my name is Sarah, and today I'm going to give a spoiler-free review of Brandon Sanderson's Warbreaker. Lately I've been trying to read a little bit more adult fantasy, and after reading Mistborn earlier in the year, I wanted to give another Brandon Sanderson series a go. And I'm so happy I picked Warbreaker. This was a really awesome book with a really interesting magic system. So let's get into it. First, I'm going to give a little bit more background information on what happens in the book, and then I'm going to give my thoughts on overall about the book itself, all the while trying to avoid the spoilers that are so ripe in this really intriguing book. So the center for me of Warbreaker is really the magic system, which is built on this basis that every person is born with what's called biochromatic breath. Specifically, they're born with one biochromatic breath. The breath essentially allows you to be a more lively, vibrant version of yourself. You can still live without breath, it just makes you what's called a drab. But if you collect large numbers of these breaths all together, it allows you to have extraordinary powers, such as the ability to sense where other people are, to be able to better appreciate music and distinguish between colors and sounds, and for a large number of breaths, be able to channel those breaths and control inanimate objects, which is called awakening. Now, there's a couple different schools of thought that surround how these breaths should be treated. And in fact, that's one of the central conflicts of the book. Up in a kingdom called Idris, the idea is that breath is kind of like your soul, and that giving away your breath is something that is almost sacrilegious or to be pitied. Down in the valley of Hallandren, breath is looked at a little bit more transactionally. You have people that collect breaths into tens and hundreds and thousands to be able to do things such as awakening and be priests to their returned gods. And what these gods need is essentially for them to be these divine type beings on earth is they need a breath of week that they just consume with the idea that they will eventually provide some type of good to the society around them. And so from that you can see that there are people down in Hallandren who don't feel this very tight connection to their breath, and even some that are excited and willing to give up their breath to the returned gods. So at the beginning of the novel, we have two princesses up in Idris, Ciri and Vivenna, who the older of which, Vivenna, knows from the day she is born she is going to be bound to marry the god king of Hallandren, who they overall in Idris believe are heretics for thinking so liberally about their breaths. The day comes where Vivenna is slated to leave for Hallandren, and things go a little bit sideways. I don't want to spoil too much, but it is so interesting. You have two sisters who have to make drastic personality changes in order to survive the circumstances that they're put in. You have a god that doesn't necessarily believe in his own divinity. You have a cast of characters beyond your main ones that have interesting and fully developed character arcs. Now, some of the other reviews that I've seen have basically called this novel like a pseudo-mystery novel because there is so much intrigue in it, and I completely agree. There is so many little pieces to this novel that you have to keep track of in order to start piecing together what's actually happening. I've been watching a couple of Brandon Sanderson's lectures on YouTube that he does for a writing class in BYU, and he talks a lot about basically setup and payoff, of putting in little clues for your reader and kind of making marks that, hey, you should remember this for later in the novel, and then eventually having that piece of information come back around and add to the story. And he definitely practiced what he preaches. Warbreaker is filled with all these little clues that might not pay off for another 200 pages, but you are reading to the next page in hopes that it will come up. There are so many little pieces where he stops and I can feel as the reader him sitting here telling me, hey, look at this is gonna be important, this is gonna come up again. And I didn't realize how much I really enjoyed that, how much I really enjoyed having to piece together what all was happening within learning about the magic system and the world that he's put us in. Outside of that, his character work is phenomenal. The amount of growth that you see, particularly in Vivenna, is insane. I actually think she has one of the best earned character arcs I've ever seen in any book that I've ever read. There was a while that I really thought I was going to hate Vivenna, but by the end of the novel, I am rooting for her harder than any other character within the novel. Outside of that, Lightsong, who is a returned god, just about every scene he's in, I get a laugh out of. Sanderson's jokes that he gives him are hilarious. I really enjoy the character of Lightsong, and it helps lighten up the mood and at times get kind of dark. And finally, Ciri. On her own, she is such a cool and fun character, but then she develops a relationship throughout this novel that I think only adds to her character, and I think is very wholesome and just nice to read about when you end up getting to those parts. As I talked about before, Warbreaker is kind of a wild ride, and so you want to keep going to the next page. For how long this book was, it flew by, and so I think that was another big pro. The only real con that I have on this novel, and I'm actually going to do more on this topic as a whole in a later video, is just some of the believability of the inequality system that they set up. As I talked about earlier, down in Hallendren, there are people who collect large numbers of breaths, hundreds and thousands. Since every person is only born with one breath, would kind of imply that there are a large number of people who would have no breath at all. But the number of drabs we meet throughout the novel is actually pretty low. And while I know that you're going to have breaths that carry over from the next life in basically the way that this magic system works, I still think in order to sustain the returned gods who need just a baseline breath a week just to survive, it doesn't really make sense that you wouldn't have a large number of people out there that have no breath at all. Especially when you have a character within the novel that hits absolute rock bottom. I would expect most of the people she would meet would be drabs, or at least at some other point in society you would have a large number of drabs, but you just don't. And I think that was really confusing for me, and when I looked back on the novel, I wish I had more explanation around. So I hope you enjoyed my review of Warbreaker. I really enjoyed this book and would love to talk to any of you down in the comments about the book if you've read it. If you enjoyed this video, please think about subscribing. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video.